Hello, my name is Christine Prisland, and I am the first Abhyasi and preceptor in Canada. This is the story of life-changing coincidences and the who, how, when, and where of the beginning of Sri Ramchandra Mission, Sahaj Marg, Heartfulness Meditation, which started in Canada over 50 years ago. In September of 1971, I realized my dream of going to India to search for a teacher of yoga. I flew to London and traveled overland through Europe and the Middle East, crossing the Indian-Pakistan border in November. On my travels, I met someone who had started Sahaj Marg meditation, but for some reason, I resisted taking it up. Eventually, after we had met first in London, and then coincidentally in Delhi, and then in Kathmandu, he convinced me that this was my fate. So in early January 1972, I took my introductory sittings in Delhi and wrote immediately to Babaji. He invited me to come to his home on the 24th. My first impression of Babaji was how natural and authentic he was. He captured my heart in those few days by accepting me for who I was inside. He did not see the outside of a young, rather confused girl. There was no judgment, only complete acceptance. I felt he saw to the core of my being, my spiritual self, which I had been longing for. One day, he presented me with a sari. And it was that moment when my heart totally melted and became his. After a few days, he asked me if I would become a preceptor. I was reluctant to say yes. In fact, my mind really wanted to say no. I knew so little, but my mouth, as if being pulled on a string, said yes. Thus he set me firmly on my life path. Babaji asked me to meet him in the eastern U.S. in May. So when I returned to Vancouver in April, I knew I had to find a way to get across the country with no money. I talked to a friend and he said, "Oh, we're leaving next week. There's room in the car for you." Off we went, stopping in Calgary, in towns in Saskatchewan, in Winnipeg, Toronto, and finally Montreal, in time for me to see Babaji in Troy, New York. This is important, as for the first several years, these were the places in Canada that established meditation centers. In December 1972, I started work at Simon Fraser University near Vancouver, and we established the first center. One of the first Abhyasis, Don Sabaran, after only a few weeks of practice, went to India to visit Babaji. Babaji asked him to officially establish the mission in Canada, and we were among the first countries to do so. Our official status as a non-profit society and charitable organization came into effect on the 15th of January, 1974. Don became the second preceptor in Canada the next year. Moving on to 1981, Kamlesh Patel called me from the US. He said that he'd seen Babaji before he left India, and Babaji told him, "Canada is coming up." He asked me if I knew what Babaji meant. I told him I didn't know, but the fact that he said Canada was coming up was very heartening. In 1985, Chariji visited Vancouver for about 10 days, 2 years after becoming the successor to Babaji. When I drove Chariji and his company from the airport, I remember feeling very proud of Vancouver as we went past stately homes and beautiful gardens. I felt like he would really be enjoying it At that exact moment, he looked at me and he said, "You know, if people spent as much time meditating as they do on mowing and growing their lawns, it would be much better for them." Thus, he set the tone and the focus for the whole visit. I learned so much from them in the closeness of those days about being open-hearted, about acceptance, how to be gracious, joyful, and how to adopt the generous Indian way of hospitality. In the earlier years, we met in people's homes, but gradually some centers were able to rent spaces to meet. Our first ashram in Canada came into being in Toronto in 2015. With dedicated work from the initial team of Kim and Tom Hansen, Bhavani, Raj Mangat, Kartik, Lakshmi and Aravind, and many, many others. In Canada, a country with 6 time zones and only 40 million people, the same as California, growth has happened slowly but surely. Now in 2024, and due to the untiring efforts and encouragement and love from Babaji, from Chariji, and our dear Daji, Heartfulness now has centers all across Canada, including the Yukon and Northwest Territories, from sea to sea to sea. Our masters have showered their blessings all over the globe, and Canada has definitely blossomed under their dedication, devotion, and loving care. I am so happy to see the slow but sure expansion enthusiasm from the youth and the growing number of seekers of today, creating unity and well-being in their communities. We are advancing in love.